in one analysis, it will all end up being wonderfully deflationary, in the sense that everything will get cheaper, all of these services will become massively cheaper. Value will be created, but in fact, probably far more value will be destroyed than is created.
And why do you think that?
In the sense that there is this massive incumbency of heavy industries of all kinds, in fossil fuels, in steel, and so on, energy-intensive industries, which actually add up to a huge part of the economy and a huge part of employment. And I can see, potentially that in fact, far more capital value may end up being destroyed by it than is created in these upsurging industries where competition and falling prices will actually produce industries which are in aggregate have a lower capital value and probably employ fewer people.
Okay, so thank you. I understand now the argument, but I'm not sure of the evidence, because I think the industries you describe are a surprisingly small part of the modern economy, and it's the other way around, I suspect. I don't know the UK numbers. I know in the US we have 3 times as many jobs in the solar as in the coal industry, for example. We have more jobs in efficiency and renewables than in all of the fossil fuel industries. So then, of course, if you look at the risk in those businesses, it gets to be much more interesting to figure out what skills do they have that society will want to pay for over the long run. If you're very good at drilling holes in the ground, there are some applications that can use that skill. If you're good at building offshore platforms, that's probably good for offshore wind. But it's not a terribly good fit if you look across the whole spectrum of what the hydrocarbon industries are really good at, because they're really good at managing large, extremely complex projects and not that many of them, whereas what the market is increasingly wanting is a lot of small projects. That's a big cultural shift, and I think that's probably the biggest cultural challenge in pulling this off. But think about it for a moment from the perspective of the electricity industry. If you're facing those 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse and you're a standard big utility, let's see, an unwise posture would be ostrich, keep calm, bury head in sand, because head in the sand, rump in the air, all that's missing is the kick me sign. You could do the sloth posture, hang on hard and hope it will all blow past. That's not likely to work because you'll lose financial flexibility. But there are some intelligent responses you could use. You could buy the insurgents and offer their products as your own branded offering. You could do other kinds of co-opetition. You could be a technically neutral integrator of all qualified offerings running the grid. You could, of course, finance the transition. You could lease, build, own, operate, whatever, stuff on the other side of the meter where you have to move in order to sit on the same side as the customer. And those are not mutually exclusive options. So this is exactly the direction that the new parts of E.ON and FAA and JDF Suez and NL are going in. JDF Suez has, last I heard, 80,000 people selling and delivering efficiency services. Not bad. Those kinds of transitions will come to the hydrocarbon industry. It just takes a little longer, but I think it has to happen pretty quickly in view of the rather urgent demand threats that I described.
A last question from the left back side of the room, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a huge fan. I just wanted to ask, you didn't mention anything about behavioral change or sort of changing our relationship to our energy system, which I think is a pretty important element of this, both in terms of rebound effects and other second-order effects that come with efficiency. So what is the role of behavioral change or sort of changing our relationship with our energy system in terms of the way we think about it? How important is that?
It can be quite important. It's not something that my group has worked on very much because basically we're not comfortable telling other people how to live. We try to set example, but particularly in our society, this is very much a matter of individual choice. But I think there's a great deal we're learning from behavioral economics and behavioral science that can come into play and is very trans-ideological in appeal. You mentioned rebound, of which I think altogether too much has been made. It has a real effect. It's typically a few percent effect where you can measure it at all. And it certainly doesn't get to the level of backfire where you lose more than the saving. That would be impossible. So we do count it in our analyses to the extent it's justified by convincing literature, but that turns out to be quite small. So, yeah, you should pay attention to it, but not much. There are much more important things to worry about.
Amory, may I pose a last question to you? If you were to point to where possibility meets scaling up in the last few years, you've clearly pointed to the energy sector, the electricity infrastructure sector as one of them. Mobility, vehicles being another one that clearly is emerging now into, a scale of changing not only the technology, the footprint. What other sectors or what other frontiers do you see being part of that low carbon economy emerging in the next few years that have takeoff potential?
Well, natural systems, farming, forestry, grazing have huge potential to save money and carbon at the same time. And there, one is up against the same kinds of entrenched incumbencies as in energy, but perhaps even more built into the fabric of regulation. We've been giving some thought at Rocky Mountain Institute to what is causing and what can drive even faster the superlinear scaling, the exponential scaling of the energy transformation. And we suspect that a lot of it comes from hidden interactions between different sectors of the economy, some tangent, some quite remote from each other. So we're starting to map those connections to see which can be reinforced or sped up and which perhaps can be called into existence when they're not there now. I'll give you a very simple-minded example. Products like this smartphone are made by companies that will pay, let's see, without giving numbers, they will pay you enough if you're a battery maker for a battery with, say, a fifth more energy per unit volume, that it gives you an order of magnitude more profit. So as a battery maker, you are highly incentivized to innovate denser batteries. But that then makes possible cost-effective electric cars. And then when you put thousands of batteries in each car, you make so many of them that they get cheap. And then you start having distributed storage and distributed solar all over the place. And then you get a distressed natural gas industry and pushing coal plants up the merit order curve so they don't run many hours, and then they have to be shut down because they can't make money. There's all these ripple effects spreading out in an intricate web. And I think if we understand those connections a lot better, we'll find that the sum is very much more than the parts. And this is, and farmers' work at Santa Fe Institute and others on expanding returns comes to displace in many, many places the Ricardian economics that was all based on limited resources of land or other physical things. There are now hundreds of industries that display expanding returns, not diminishing returns to scale. And yet this is still a subject that makes economic theorists very uncomfortable. It makes their models blow up. It makes their heads hurt. They don't want to think about it at all. And there are some good economists around who are starting to figure this out, and I think it's the next conceptual revolution in economics that is going to get us off the big mistake about climate policy, which is assuming that climate solutions are costly when actually they're profitable. It was a basic sign error that came from assuming that markets are essentially perfect already, or at least market failures are unimportant, and therefore if we're going to use energy a lot more efficiently or buy it from some cleaner source, it's going to cost more. And then the only question is how much do we have to raise the price to make this attractive, by taxation or whatever, which we then count as a cost. No, this is all daft. It doesn't actually work that way. You have over $100 billion industries in solar, in wind power, in efficiency that are proving it wrong every day. And I'm just hoping that this word reaches more policymakers rather quickly so that they don't keep assuming cost where actually there's profit.